Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of FinServ Tech Oracles. I'm Johna Johnson here with my oracular colleague, Jerry Murphy, to share our thoughts on technology for financial services firms. For this episode, Jerry, you wanted to talk about JFK Jr.'s recent announcement to put the entire federal budget on blockchain. That's his proposal.
Yeah.
Let's start with question one. Should the U.S. government budget be put on blockchain? Does that make any sense?
Well, I think it's kind of good in theory. It's probably iffy in practice. I mean, one of the things JFK Jr. says is now all 300 people, we're going to have 300 million eyeballs looking at the budget. Color me skeptical that you're going to have 300 million people looking at our budget. Even if they had access to it, I don't think they're going to be looking at it. But the other thing is, you're not going to see everything because you're still going to have, things with the CIA, NSA budgets. There's going to be things that are going to be protected. So not everybody is going to actually know about a $16,000 toilet seat. Certainly, if it's in a nuclear sub or a SEAL team break room, I don't think that's actually going to happen. And there's some other legacy stuff that it's a lot stickier to do in reality, even if you could do it. But even if you can do it, you're not going to see everything that you think you're going to.
So transparency is one reason, and I think it's the reason that JFK Jr. is proposing it. But I do think, the auditing is just as important because that shows you who made the changes to the budget item. Granted that we're not going to be able to see every single line item in the budget. The last reason that I really glommed onto this idea is blockchain turns out to be incredibly useful to glue together legacy systems that it's too expensive or too unwieldy to re-engineer or modernize. And as we all know, the federal government has legacy systems that go back 50 years or older than us. And gluing them together is a nightmare if you can still find programmers that can program in those languages. The nice thing about blockchain is it can integrate those islands of legacy without requiring all that re-engineering, refactoring, re-architecting of the applications.
Well, that's a great point. I mean, I think, certainly technically there's two things, right? In some senses, putting a blockchain label on something is kind of like giving something a meta tag, right? And then you can put a meta tag on something with a pointer. So technically you can do things in a way that are pretty straightforward and efficient. So all of that is complete goodness. Obviously, the technical details of how you do it, especially when you're looking at a myriad of systems that fundamentally have, different databases, different network segments. Some stuff is going to be air gapped. It's, the reality making it happen is going to be much more difficult than the concept. But conceptually, there's a lot of really strong things there for it.
Okay, so we both agree that the accountability, auditability, and integrability, if that were a word, makes sense. But as you're kind of alluding to, is it even possible to migrate the entire U.S. budget to blockchain?
Well, I think it's theoretically possible. I think in practice, it isn't going to happen just because there are going to be things that will be air gap for security purposes. So there are going to be things that are physically isolated and they will remain physically isolated. So those types of things, you're not going to be able to put on a central government-wide blockchain, right? There's going to have to be created. And the reality is that if you do that for, quote, everything, it's not even going to be two, right? There's going to be several. You're going to have things that are in isolation that even between the isolated things, you're not going to be able to get together, I think. So if you do it, you'll start with the larger, easier things, and you'll move over time to other pieces. So in my mind, if we do this, and I think they eventually will, it's really going to be a journey that's going to happen over, honestly, probably decades.
Well, and speaking of decades, that would be my other concern is, blockchain is, of course, based on the non-factorability of very large prime numbers, which quantum computing can blow to smithereens. So one of my concerns would be if you were to migrate the US budget to blockchain, you'd need to be damn sure you're migrating it to a quantum resistant ledger rather than, traditional conventional blockchain. Because without that, you're going to be in for a world of hurt in reasonably short order. by reasonably short order, I don't care whether it's 5 months, 5 years, or 15 years, whatever were to put in place in 2024 is gonna still be there in 2074. We know
Right.
that's how the government works.
But the good news is, because it's reasonable to assume this is going to take decades. If we start now, we can start now by building it quantum safe from the beginning, as opposed to doing something that you're then going to have to retrofit with something else 10 years later. Just start now making them quantum safe, and accept the fact that you're going to do it over time, and start with the bigger, non-objectionable public stuff that people aren't going to mind them seeing, and then move to the more sensitive things over time.
Okay, so you're kind of moving right along into what do you recommend? So what would if somebody if you were a presidential candidate, what would your recommendation on the government use of blockchain be?
Well, if I was a presidential candidate, I probably wouldn't even talk about it.
That's
But,
true.
if I was elected and they said, okay, now this is something that you have to implement, based on some vague promise you made to a bunch of people eating corn dogs, then I would say, I would start with making sure what I put in first is quantum safe. I would start with federal items on public things that shouldn't have a whole bunch of uh, problem issues, and we want accountability. So, for example, public work stuff, anything that has to do with building infrastructure across states, that's a good place to start, because that's a place where people really care about accountability, about building a bridge to nowhere in Alaska and stuff like that. So that would be one where the public people would have a chance to get it right themselves morally, as well as doing a quantum safe, and start with those bigger ones, and then over time migrate to issues that are going to be more sensitive over time.
Okay, so just wrapping it up, it sounds like your top takeaways are number one, it's not a crazy idea. There are benefits to putting the US budget on blockchain and those benefits include transparency, accountability, auditability, and also integrability. Number two, that your recommendation would be to start slowly and be aware that there are parts of the government that may need to stay in the dark. I personally would like to know exactly how much we're spending on those. I don't need to know what they are, but I do need to know what we're spending, because I have a suspicion it's a lot bigger than most of us think. And last one is be aware of the threat that quantum cryptography poses to conventional cryptography, and make it quantum safe from the get-go. Did I kind of capture everything?
I think you caught it. And the only thing I would flag on what you said, and again, maybe it's because I'm a West Point grad, former military guy, I don't even know that I necessarily want the world to know how much I'm spending on classified stuff, but there should probably be some broad envelopes there. But
Hey, I'm a taxpayer. It's my money. I need to know. You can call it whatever you want to call it, and I don't care what it's going to, but I just need to know, is it like 2% of the budget or 27%? I think since it's my money, I should know.
you're going to get a fight there, I think, with a lot of people, including somebody like me. So that'll be
Well, there we go. We can do that on our next episode of FinServ Tech Oracles. How much of the federal budget should be known to the taxpayers? Speaking of next episode, please tune in next week at 0900 for the next episode of FinServ Tech Oracles, right before the markets open on Tuesdays. And thank you for listening.
Take care.